leads me along, I will follow. See, you follow a man here. Anything is ahead is there. Anything is back is here. He said, I will follow because I know that everything is going to be effective, going to be fine. That woke up the council, and we started. Took them all down to New York. They didn't know when they stepped off the pier getting onto the big boat, they were looking for a tug out on the side, you know. And they didn't realize till we pulled away from the pier that they were aboard this vessel. Well, when we got over to England, we all arrived over there, and they were quite a sensation. And they did some strange, of course they were very popular naturally, and to such an extent, you know, that, they were socially, they were a great hit socially. And especially a couple of the younger ones. When I say younger ones, they were only middle-aged, and the people just took them under their wing. So that by the time we came back, you know, if there happened to be any little illegitimate Arapahoes over there, to show you the sense of humor that the Indians have, they still refer to them back on that reservation as little covered wagons. When we came back, got back into this country, people asking all about the things that the Indians had done, how they liked it. And this old chief goes in the lodge. Some newspaper man interviewing him one day said, now what was the most interesting thing that you ever saw? Or what impressed you the most when you were over there in that far country, way over there? Rosenlarz thought for a minute, and there's a twinkle in his eye, and he told me in signs, so I interpreted for him to this newspaper man. He said the thing that impressed him the most was this subway. This fellow said, the subway. Of all the things that he has seen over in England, and he says, the subway, this train, that's the most important? He said, why? So I asked Rosenlarz, why? He said it reminded him, brought back his heart to his country, the reservation, Wyoming. He said, why? Well, you see, this is a sign for a prairie dog. That's his hole. The prairie dog comes up, dives down, you see his tail wag. That's his hole. He said, all the same, parallel, all the same prairie dog. You go down one hole and come up another. That flabbergasted this fellow because he figured he was going to talk about Queen Victoria's monument or something of that sort, you know. Well, you know, we've had quite a session here talking about these signs and the different signs and the different tribes. And at some other time, if there's some of the things that might interest you or that might get into more subtle things, I'd be glad to talk them over with you at any time. But I think I've given you just about as many signs to digest that is possible in a couple of sessions. So I'll have to say to you, as I used to say years ago, in this little session that we've had, we have met, we've shaken hands, our hearts are big, we're happy, we've become friends. So ahead, let us meet every once in a while and talk this way, and our hearts will be big and everything will be wash-tay. Now, this is a picture that was taken over 50 years ago. And that Indian on my right is Ravoka, the Paiute Indian medicine man that became the Indian Messiah. And he was responsible for the rise of the ghost dance religion. You know, that ghost dance, the repercussions of that, of course, it eventually led to the killing of Sitting Bull, the Battle of Wounded Knee, and the last Indian uprising we had in this country. The strange thing about this, you know, it was really the Indians' last gasp. Because these poor fellows, their whole history was one of broken promises, broken treaties by the government, and they were heartsick and despairing, and they grasped at any sort of a straw that would give them any sort of hope for the future, which they didn't have, of course. They were given half rations when they should have been given entire rations, and the Indian agents in some instances were selling the other half to the white men and just using the Indians as a means of sort of lining their own purse. And the Indians were quite in despair. Well, over in the Mason Valley, way over in Nevada, this Indian medicine man came to life, Ravoka. He was a Paiute. And it wasn't long before word of this great medicine man spread to some of the Plains tribes. Now, the tribe that probably furthered it and gave it more impetus than any other were the Arapahoes on the Wind River Reservation up at Fort Washakie. And the first they ever heard of this, you see, the word had spread up from Nevada, had gone up north, then came across to the Plains Indians, and then down through Montana, it came down into Wyoming. Now, let me show you on this map how this thing came about. Over here at Fort Washakie, which is in the heart of Wyoming, as I say, at the Wind River Reservation, we've got the Arapahoes and the Shoshones. And the first word the Arapahoes had of it was an Indian by the name of Lone Wolf who came down. He was a Grovant from up in Montana. And he brought word of this great Messiah. So they asked where this fellow was. And he said the best information he had that this man was away out in Nevada on the Walker River Reservation. So when they came back, when they heard this, they sent a delegation under an Indian called Sage. Sage and Yellow Calf, 3 or 4 others, made this trip all the way down to the Mason Valley, the Walker River Reservation, met the Messiah, got his songs, got his paints, his religion, and brought it all the way back up here to Fort Washakie. Now, word soon spread to the other reservations about, and over here on the Standing Rock Reservation was Sitting Bull. Now, Sitting Bull, you know, it's a strange thing. Sitting Bull, after the Custer fight, had a certain notoriety, and he was a great medicine man himself. And he felt that here was a religion that if he could get hold of, that would unite all the Indians and probably bring out a general uprising that would finally put the white man down and give the Indian the break that he's supposed to have. So he sent a delegation down to visit the Messiah. And his delegation consisted of one Indian whose name was Kicking Bear, and another one, Short Bull. Now, Kicking Bear and Short Bull, they led the delegation of Sioux over to Wind River, and from there, they went on down to visit the Messiah with another delegation of Arapahoes. Well, they brought back that religion, and both these fellows I knew, Short Bull, Kicking Bear, and they brought back tales of this strange religion and the songs that went with it. And the ghost dance song, it was a song of despair, It was, Father, have pity on us. Father, have pity on us. We're cold, and we have no fires to warm us. We're hungry, and we have nothing to eat. Father, have pity on us. Father, have pity on us. They also brought back with them a ghost shirt. Now, the Messiah told me later that he had nothing to do with this ghost shirt business at all. He never told the Indians about it, that that was their own idea, and they concocted this themselves. Now, these ghost shirts, I'll show you them. Here's one. These are the originals, you know. And you'll see they're painted with the sacred symbols. The stars, the sun, the moon, the turtle, the eagle, the buffalo. And the tales that those Sioux had to tell about these ghost shirts was that by wearing these ghost shirts, if they tangled with the white man's bullets would strike against them and flatten out and fall to the ground, and any Indian wearing a ghost shirt could never be injured by the white man's fire. And Avoca said, now there's one, here's another one, a more elaborate one. This is an Arapaho one. And you see those sacred symbols painted down there. These were the vestments they were to wear in the ghost dance, which they did. And of course, this was strong, strong medicine for them. Well, the Indians started dancing. This ghost dance was danced in a circle. The men and women all formed a circle, and they danced in this great circle, the ghost dance. Well, the thing was spreading now, and let me show you on this map over here again. Now, the Indians from over at Fort Hall, Idaho, the Bannocks and the Shoshones, they had heard about this, so they sent delegations over to Fort Washington to find out. They would be joined, as I say, by delegations that Sitting Bull had sent, others from the Pine Ridge, and they'd all journey down, meet the Messiah, bring back, and every one of them brought back something different, you know. Here was strong medicine. Now, up here at Wind River, there was an Indian called Sitting Bull, not to be confused with this Sitting Bull the Sioux. He was Sitting Bull the Arapaho. And as General Scott said one time, he said, well, if Avoca was the Messiah, then Sitting Bull the Arapaho, he must be John the Baptist. So he carried the religion all the way down into those tribes in Oklahoma. And they started dancing. Well, the authorities were getting a little bit scary by this time, you know. And particularly up around that Standing Rock Agency, where McLaughlin, the agent, a man who terms himself the friend of the Indian, the great treaty maker, he said that we better go out and do something about these Indians, stop this dancing. Well, it was the most stupid thing you could possibly do. Let them dance. Now, when Sitting Bull the Arapaho brought that dance down into the Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma, and Scott then was a captain of cavalry stationed down there in the Indian Territory, and the authorities asked Scott to go out and see what this was all about. So he did the perfectly logical, psychological thing. He'd go to these old fellows and he'd watch the dance, sit down with them, watch these Indians dancing. He said, tell me, how long are you going to do this dance? What happens about this? And the Indians said, oh, if we dance this dance and sing these songs, then one day great medicine is going to take place. There's going to be a big cloud come over the whole earth. On it will be the buffalo and the elk and the antelope. And all the Indians who had ever died will be on their war ponies, and that cloud will bury all the white men beneath it, and the country again will belong to the Indians. Well, Scott said, you know, I'm pretty interested in that, you know. I'm half Indian, you know, myself. I feel like an Indian. My heart is Indian. So I want to be here when that thing comes on. I don't want to stay down here with the white men. I want to be up on that cloud where all the Indians and all the buffalo are. So how long are we going to dance this dance? Oh, don't know. He said, I don't know, can't tell you. So he'd let it go a while, and he'd finally get them together again one day. He'd come out every day and watch the dances. Well, how long do you think you're going to dance? Are you going to dance a week? You're going to dance a month? You're going to have to dance a year? You're going to dance forever? So you ask this fellow, how long you got to dance this dance before this miracle takes place? Well, he makes that. Well, that began to sink in. They'd think, talk, and by using that psychology, Scott just talked them out of it, and the first thing you know, the old Indians began to say, oh, we think this fellow's a fake. I don't believe it. Don't believe it. We listened to him, but the truth, it isn't there. So gradually, that whole thing simmered down in Oklahoma, down the Indian Territory. The Indians danced themselves out and nothing happened. Now, if that had taken place up north, we never would have had the tragedy of Wounded Knee, or Sitting Bull, for instance. But McLaughlin was so anxious to put this ghost dance down. He says it's dangerous. They're all going to rise up. And his idea was that the first step would be to arrest Sitting Bull, who was the instigator up at Standing Rock and among all those Sioux. Now, Sitting Bull, as I said a moment ago, he was quite a medicine man. So they decided that Sitting Bull was the key figure in all of this dancing. And if we bring in Sitting Bull, arrest him, make him come into the agency, that we'll stop this dancing. It'll quit. Well, Sitting Bull, you see, had, after the Custer affair, he lost all his authority. And then a few years before that, as a matter of fact, very few people know this, but he went out on tour with Buffalo Bill Circus, his Wild West show. And he had him for a couple of years. And here was a picture of Cody and Sitting Bull in 1885 on the Buffalo Bill show. Well, Cody was a great friend of Sitting Bull's. Naturally, he'd worked for him on the show. So Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was showing over in London. And Cody needed a shot in the arm for that show. He needed some more publicity. So when he heard about all of that ghost dance trouble, he thought, this is it. So he got on a boat and came right back to this country, left Johnny Baker to run the show, his foster son. He came back, came out to Chicago, and General Miles was in command of the department there, and Cody had dinner with General Miles this night, and they had a very good dinner. He put the idea up to Miles. He said, let me go out and I'll bring in Sitting Bull. If you don't have any trouble, I can bring him in with no trouble whatever. So Miles gave Cody an order to go out and bring in Sitting Bull. And there's a strange thing. I don't think you'll find it in many history books around, but the order that Miles wrote out for Cody was written on the back of the wine card of the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago. Well, Cody headed out then for Fort Yates, which is up there near Standing Rock Agency. And the word had gotten out, of course, and word got to the Indian agent out there, and word got to the Army officers. They didn't want Cody coming in there stealing all their thunder. He was going to take it away from the Army, he was going to take it away from the Indian Service, and Buffalo Bill would have gotten all the publicity. So Cody started out for Fort Yates. And I remember an old Colonel Willis Uline. He was a young lieutenant at that time at Fort Yates. And he said that when Cody arrived, they'd had word to delay him as long as possible until they could get the wires going to Washington, go over Miles' head, and countermand Miles' order. The order went out, or the word went out to all the young officers to take Buffalo Bill in tow that night and try to drink him under the table so that he wouldn't be able to take off the next morning until word got back from Washington over the telegraph. Well, as Colonel Uline said, he said, I never saw it fail when you try to do a thing like that. Everybody suffers except the principal. And he said, by the crack of dawn, all the young officers were under the table, and Buffalo Bill said, where's the buckboard and the team? Get me an interpreter. Get me a guide. Show me where Sitting Bull's camp is and go out and get him. Well, they couldn't do otherwise. He was the only man alive by that time. So he got into his buckboard and started off for Sitting Bull's camp, which was over on the Grand Ronde River. And by that time, word had come from Washington countermanding the order. So he put an orderly on a horse and he tore after Cody and caught up to him before he reached Sitting Bull's camp, countermanding the order and ordering Buffalo Bill back to Fort Yates. Now, had Cody, it's always been my belief that had Cody been allowed to go on, he would have just put Sitting Bull on the buckboard with him and brought him in. Sitting Bull would have come in. But instead of that, McLaughlin decides that he's going to send a troop of Indian police out and bring in Sitting Bull. And here's the troop of Indian police that went after him. And they were under Lieutenant Bullhead, Shavehead, Sergeant Red Tomahawk. And when you send an Indian policeman after anybody, he brings him in. So this group of Indian police, or this troop of Indian police, started out for Sitting Bull's camp, but in order to support them, the commanding officer at Fort Yates sent out 2 troops of the 8th Cavalry, held in reserve and out of sight beyond the ridge, that if necessary they would come to the rescue of the Indians. Well, when the Indian police got out to Sitting Bull's camp, they surrounded his cabin. Snow was on the ground. Remember, this is late in December, 15th of December of 1890. They surrounded the camp, told Sitting Bull to come out. He said, wait till I get my moccasins on. So he pulled on his moccasins, got out of bed, came out with them, and when they came out, by the time they got out to the door, Indians had begun gathering around, saw these Indian policemen, so there was quite a crowd of Indians out around the door. And as he came out with Bullhead on one side, Shavehead on the other, and Red Tomahawk behind him, his son, Sitting Bull's son, said, are you the great Sitting Bull, the great chief of the Sioux Nation, that allows yourself to be taken prisoner by these Indians dressed like white men? Or are you the great Sitting Bull? And Sitting Bull started to pull back, and just at the moment he did that, a fellow called Catch the Bear reached under his blanket, pulled out a pistol, and shot Bullhead. And they shot Shavehead, and when the first shots were fired, Red Tomahawk, who was standing behind him, the sergeant, just took his pistol, put it to the back of Sitting Bull's head and pulled the trigger. And that was the end of Sitting Bull. When Sitting Bull went down, the firing started on all sides. Indians pulled out their rifles, pulled out their pistols, began firing at the Indian police, and the Indian police were pretty hard pressed. So while this firing is going on, the captain who was in command of both these troops of the 8th Cavalry heard the firing, and he mounted up his men, rode down hell for leather, and came down in there to the rescue of the Indian police. And a general engagement took place. And as a result, they pulled the Indian police out of there, and as a result, the Indians, thinking now we're all going to be killed, struck their camps, got on their horses, moved their camps, and all headed for the Badlands, and the uprising was on. Well, of course, now we had a situation. Here we were. We really had warfare. Troops were sent in from all directions, tried to quell these Indians, and the Indians, of course, had taken to the Badlands, but it was the dead of winter. They left without any provisions. They didn't have half their warm clothing with them, and they were suffering. Word was sent to them by interpreters to come in, surrender, come back to the reservations. Nothing is going to happen to you. Come in and sit down on the reservation. Come back to the bread house.